Thanks everyone for joining us. Um, my name is Taja Eisen, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Orion. And I'm very excited to welcome you to a celebration of Orion's Spring 2026 issue, Working the Land, Lessons in Labor and Collective Action. Our spring issue explores the relationship between labor and the environment, and it calls for solidarity at a time when that value is under attack. Inside, the contributors write about various ways that humanity has put the planet to work, whether by extracting resources, expanding the reaches of capitalism, or using other creatures as helpmeets. But they also venture to imagine what an alternative version of this relationship might look like. One where the channel between labor and the land isn't driven by things like division or profit, but by coalition and repair. I'll share with you in the chat a link to buy individual copies of the issue. Oh yes, thank you. I always forget when I'm like I remember right before I'm going to be on camera that I should grab my copy and hold it up to camera. So there's a link to buy individual copies of the issue. And in the event that you are just learning about Orion for the first time, we're an independent nonprofit that publishes writing and art at the intersection of nature and culture. Through our print magazine, our digital stories, our book anthologies, our workshops, and our programming, we aim to invite people into a community of caring for the planet. And as a nonprofit, we rely on the support of our readers and our donors to keep us going, especially during this very wild time for arts organizations. We're currently finalizing production on our summer issue, which is about whales. And that'll be followed by an issue on the science of taste and flavor. And we have many exciting things planned for the rest of the year and beyond. I invite you to learn more about us at our website. And I hope to be able to welcome you into our community. We're also happy today to share a coupon code for 20% off a one-year subscription or gift subscription. And the code, which I'll also put into the chat, is appropriately collective action. It is now my honor to introduce our esteemed moderator and panelists. The conversation today will be moderated by Emma Pattee, who also moderated a fantastic conversation in the issue. Emma Pattee is a climate journalist and fiction writer. In 2021, she coined the term climate shadow to describe an individual's potential impact on climate change. Her debut novel, Tilt, is a national bestseller and was named a Best Book of the Year by Time, NPR, Vogue, Amazon, and Scientific American. Emma will be in conversation with Kim Kelly and Naomi R. Williams. Kim Kelly is a Philadelphia-based labor reporter for In These Times magazine and has been a regular labor columnist for Teen Vogue since 2018. Her writing on labor, class, disability, and culture has appeared in The Nation, The Baffler, Rolling Stone, Esquire, The Washington Post, The New York Times, and elsewhere. A third-generation union member, she served 3 terms as an elected councilperson for the Writers Guild of America East. Her first book, Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor, was published in 2022, and the Young Readers edition, Fight to Win, Heroes of American Labor, was published in 2025. Naomi R. Williams is an associate professor of labor history at Rutgers University. Their book, A Blueprint for Worker Solidarity, Class Politics and Community in Wisconsin, examines the transformation of class identity and politics in the second half of the 20th century. And I will put all of these wonderful writers' books in the chat once I have finished my intro. So for today's event, Emma will moderate the conversation, and there will be plenty of time for audience questions at the end. So please, as those questions occur to you, put those in the Zoom Q&A box. I'll be in there answering what I can in writing. And as a reminder, this event is being recorded, and the link to the video will be sent to all registered participants after the event. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to hand things over to Emma.
Thank you, Taja. Oh my goodness, it's such an honor to get to moderate this. This is because of sort of my work in the climate space, and then just this incredible interview that I got to have with Naomi for this issue. This just is a an event that really is near and dear to my heart, and yeah, I have to kind of confess that when I pitched this idea, it was because I knew so little about solidarity. I felt almost embarrassed to pitch the idea. Um, and it's just not my. I write almost primarily about climate, and I felt this sort of immediate imposter syndrome, and then tried to read everything I could. But I was kind of in this moment where I had really come face to face with a really challenging solidarity question. I had signed on to the Writers Against the War in Gaza, this boycott of the New York Times, and then I had about an hour later been offered one of the largest journalistic piece I've ever done for the New York Times, and immediately was like, well, let's what's the fine print of solidarity? Like, of course, every rationale, that I could think of. And so I found myself in desperate need of understanding more about what solidarity meant. And that was really what pitching this piece came from. And I would say that the talk that I had with Naomi was not only just intellectually fascinating, but like on a personal level was really transformative for me. Um, and I know in the piece we talk about the song Jolene, but it really has like completely shifted some sort of more elemental worldviews I've had about what it means to want something for yourself versus being able to give it up for someone else. And Kim, your piece just was just incredibly fascinating for me, coming from the climate space, but really not ever connecting those dots. In the same way, like you have such a fascinating and different angle into it when you come at it through labor solidarity. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. I was hoping that to begin with, we could talk about something that really like is not as covered in these pieces, which is sort of how each of you came to this work. You each have built a career around kind of the study of labor, and yeah, I'm wondering if you could speak about kind of for each of you what drew you to this work. Naomi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, sure. First, let me say thank you. The issue is amazing. It's been so great to go through it and to have this conversation with both of you. Something I've been looking forward to. I'm actually coming back. Last week, I was at the Jobs with Justice convening down in Atlanta, and the energy there, like this is the next thing that makes perfect sense to do and bring it together. And it's why I do this work. It's why I love what I do so much. So thanks for having me, Emma. Thanks for having this conversation with me and Kim. And I'll say, because I I switched careers and I went back to school to get an engineering degree, and all the classes that were speaking to my heart at the time were my history classes and my political science classes. And I was really frustrated because what I was getting in my textbooks in college, right, told a different story than my lived experience. And it wasn't until I took a class on Southern labor history, using oral history and life history as a methodology, that I was like, oh, well, here's my people. This is it. And that is actually it, right? If we don't know our history, if we're told a story about the past that doesn't reflect our lived experience, then we're separated from it. And so what I have done since then is to collect people's stories, use their stories to center my research questions, right? So I'm asking questions about how people come together in solidarity and then what they use their power to create, like the worlds they want to see, the communities they want to make. And so that's what I've been doing since then. Since I took that class, I've shifted everything to really kind of do this work. So I teach undergraduate and graduate student classes at Rutgers. I also do labor education outside of the university to community groups, to workers, worker centers, and unions, really to encourage folks to know the stories about their communities, their families, their lives, right? Their institutions. What are you using? What tools are you using to create the world that you want to see? And how did it get to be this way? Why does the world look the way it does today? And so those conversations play out in all of these different arenas. And it's our job, right? It's our job as working people to tell our stories so that they're not told back to us, missing all of the good work that we've done.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Kim, do you want to share your what led you to this work?
I'm so glad that they went first because now I can be like, I also did a career switch. Or maybe more of a focus switch, I guess. I don't know if you can tell, but I've spent a long time in the music business. I was not supposed to be the kind of guy that owns a blazer or like has to not get my neck tattooed, but I spent most of my, I guess, earlier adulthood in and teenagerhood and like girlhood in the heavy metal world, in the music world. For as long as I can remember, all I wanted to do was be a writer. And I ended up in the music world, and I kind of just sort of forced my way into being a music journalist and a promoter and a roadie, and I basically did it all except have any shred of musical talent. Um, to the point where I ended up working at Vice, semi RIP, as their heavy metal editor, which was a job you could have in 2015. And I was lucky because 2015, I was still deeply enmeshed in the metal world. I was, handling our coverage of heavy music at Noisy, one of Vice's properties. But I was also getting really involved in organizing in New York, specifically like in the anarchist space. And I kind of lucked out because right around all that stuff was happening, like going to shows, fighting Proud Boys, extremely 2015 types of situations, we also at work at Vice decided to unionize. And I was so thrilled. I remember a couple coworkers pulled me aside one day and were like, "Hey, we're thinking about unionizing. What do you think of that?" And I was just like, oh, thank God. Because that was my first and to date still only media job. And it was a fun job, but it was also like pretty exploitative, very much underpaid. Like there were problems, like there are pretty much any workplace, whether or not your boss is also doing a bunch of blow in the bathroom. And I come from a union family, so I knew inherently that unions are a good thing. Unions protect workers, unions help you get better wages, unions make sure that you're safe on the job. Like my whole family were construction or were steel workers or were teachers. I like to joke that, you talk about blue collar, white collar. No one in my family has ever worn a collar unless it was to a funeral. So I kind of had that background coming into it. And then as I got deeper into organizing and doing meetings, all the meetings in the world, and then bargaining sessions. And then we won a contract. Then we started organizing other people. And I started talking to other folks in the sort of New York City labor extended universe and talking to other workers in the media world about organizing. I kind of gradually realized that the passion I've always had for music, like I still had it, but that passion was kind of transferring in a way to labor and labor history and this world of radical politics I've kind of like grown into to the point where it started showing up in my work. And I was like, oh, dang, I think I got to start freelancing a little bit. And I do have to shout out Teen Vogue for giving me a shot. They're really one of the first publications that let me start writing about labor for them. And that really opened a lot of doors because here's the thing, if you're a good writer, you can write about most anything, but in order to be very good, to be knowledgeable, to be useful, you have to put that extra work in to really understand where you're coming from, that history, the context. And I kind of taught that to myself and learned from other folks I met in the movement, learned from reading, and started writing more and more about labor. I would joke that labor is my fa new favorite band. And got into it to the point where by the time I got laid off in 2019, one of the many media bloodbaths of the early 2020s, I decided I was going to try and be a freelance labor journalist, trying to figure out what that was, kind of invent sort of living from whole cloth. There's still not that many of us out there, but labor journalism is a thing you can do, turns out. And about a year later, I also sold the pitch, the proposal for my book, and it all kind of things have kept rolling from there. I still do a lot of reporting. I'm working on another book. I am immensely privileged to be able to go and speak to students and fellow workers, union halls, conferences, yada, 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 about labor history and labor's future, and about specifically focusing on marginalized workers, more vulnerable workers, criminalized workers, the people I always wanted to know more about when I was starting to get into labor, and now, and as I was writing my book, and now Like those are still the stories that I'm most drawn to. Because, shout out to the guy, the white guy in a hard hat. They raised me. We love some of them, but there's so much more to it. And that's what I try to show in this work that I've somehow blundered into having the best job in the world.
I love that. I have to say, I'm a freelance journalist as well, and I have to say, I was like, oh, interesting, like a labor journalist. Like it is funny when you sort of like these niches, which sometimes I get being a climate journalist. I was hoping, Kim, that you could read a little bit from your piece, and then that Naomi, that you could read a little bit from your interview, and then I had a couple questions, sort of more specific to the pieces. Yeah, Kim, I was hoping that you would read the opening page. Um, uh, from 17 into 18, ending with the "we need one another" line.
You have to unmute, Kim.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you for catching,
dang. That's
looking down.
thank you. I, I'm so glad you didn't hear me talking to myself. I was saying I couldn't quite I don't know where the we need one other part is.
Oh, yeah, just the starting lot, the very start of the piece, and then just flipping the page to the sort of the first sentence there. Once you flip the page.
Oh, word. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
I got you.
starting with the first breath and then just ending with "we need
Cool.
one another." I felt like that. I was really taken by just kind of like how evocative it was, and then I felt like it was just such a perfect nugget of like the whole piece, encapsulating kind of like not only the whole piece, but in some sense like this whole issue of Orion.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Group project. Um, right. The first breath that David Courtney Coates ever took was tinged with poison. The world he entered on that summer day in 1868 was gray and gloomy, dominated by the collieries that caused a hard life and early death for so many of his neighbors in County Durham. Coal dust saturated the workers' lives. It dirtied their houses, coated their shoes and skin, sickened their children, and nestled into their lungs. Clean air was a luxury reserved for those who had better things to do than sacrifice their lives to the dark satanic pits that kept England humming. Then as now, those with the least had the most to lose. When David was around 11, his parents decided to try their chances elsewhere. The family moved to the United States and briefly settled in Pennsylvania coal country. You've heard what they say about the devil you know. Before heading west to Colorado. Beneath clear blue skies, freed from the mental strain of basic survival, his world expanded far beyond the coal pits. He began to dream of something more. Now, Coates is best remembered as a labor leader, publisher, and socialist politician, but his participation in the founding of the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, left his most enduring imprint on history. According to Big Bill Haywood, another former miner and impossibly charismatic 19th century labor leader, the pithy Coates coined the union's now iconic slogan, "An injury to one is an injury to all." Once a rallying cry for its most radical dreamers, this stirring maxim has since been embraced by the movement writ large, including the more milquetoast, business-minded unions that the IWW has always railed against. It's an echo of organized labor's most sacred promises to the working class, that together we are strong enough to win, that none of us, particularly the most vulnerable, shall be left behind, that solidarity is not only our strength, it's our greatest weapon. The phrase resonates across time for a reason. Whether we're trying to stanch the flow of Gilded Age excess, bargain a sterling new union contract, or learn to survive on a rapidly warming planet, we need one another.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to ask you a question and then I'm going to ask Naomi to answer it as well. And that will lead into the piece I want Naomi to read. But it seems like in both of these pieces, there's so much, and in both of your work, there's such an emphasis on the past and what we can learn from the past. Can you talk about why that is so vital when we're looking forward, and to those of us kind of outside of the labor movement, maybe it seems like but everything happening now is new, you know? There's never been a time like this. And why is it so important that we look backwards?
Yeah, the thing is, there's really nothing new under the sun. There's just different permutations, I guess, or there's different flavors of the same thing. For example, we talk right now, understandably and necessarily so, a lot about surveillance, worker surveillance, the boss spying on you via software and apps and all sorts of technological things that I don't know enough about to even properly fear. There's always been someone breathing down your neck. Back in the day, 19th century, we had factory bosses who would send Pinkerton detectives around to peek in your windows and make sure you weren't trying to secretly organize a union or, you know, doing anything that fell outside of their very strict Christian moral code. There's always been Big Brother peeking in to see what the workers are doing, making sure they don't get ideas. It's just the execution that's different. And that is something that I think is a very useful lesson from labor history and from history in general that I think perhaps we don't give enough importance now. Because like you said, there is very much a feeling like, oh God, this is all new, this is all terrifying, there's all these new developments, how do we keep up? Chances are, whatever it is you're struggling with, someone just like you, or a little bit like you, or at least in your neighborhood or your area, has struggled with something very similar a very long time ago. And maybe they didn't solve the problem, but they found ways to survive it, or to get around it, or to sabotage it, or just to suffer through it. Either way, someone was thinking about this before your great grandparents ever met. And I think that is valuable. I think there's something comforting in that, as well as a little bit depressing, right? That we're still dealing with some of the problems that generations before us were dealing with. Uh, we're still dealing with child labor in this country. We never didn't. We never really got rid of it, even though that is one of our big banners on Labor Day. Like, we got rid of child labor. No, you didn't. But some progress was made. I think paying attention to our history, it gives us some ammunition as we push into newer fights and current fights. It gives us some armor to know too that it's never been hopeless. It's always been hard. And understanding that the only reason we've gotten anywhere is because we joined together, because we embrace solidarity, because most significantly, we, meaning every successful movement, found ways to push past divisions, artificial separations across these sort of perceived barriers of race and gender and even class in some regards to push forward for the greater good. I think there's something to that, just knowing that you're never you're never alone in whatever fight that you're engaged in. There's always been someone, as long as there's been work, as long as there's been someone being able to tell you what to do, as long as there's been hierarchy, someone has pushed back against it, whether it was the divine right of kings or our current, Christo-fascist autocracy we're dealing with. There have always been people that said, like, no, we're not going to accept that. We're going to have a meeting about it. And meetings can be, we've all probably been to a lot of meetings, but sometimes they're important and sometimes they result in world-altering movements. So history is important because it tells us how to survive the future.
Naomi, your work literally is history. What I thought was so fascinating in the conversation you and I had was also the piece which you mentioned already a little bit about oral history and how vital that is to focus on. Yeah, can you speak a little bit about kind of why the past is where we need to put some attention right now?
Right. And I want to actually kind of go back to a little bit that something that Kim said earlier too, and kind of bring it together because this is really important, right? So not only is history important, but the way we tell our stories is important, right? And so we need labor journalists. We need labor journalists to position stories, right? And give us those analytical tools. And Kim, that's what I like about your work so much, right? Is that attention to historical detail in your writing. I still tell folks when they're asking like pretty basic questions, I'm like, go to Teen Vogue. All of the answers are laid out right there. It's very clear, easy to understand, one, two, three, four, and you get some concepts, right? And then you can put it together with some of the deeper stories. But if we don't craft our own narrative, right? Then the boss sends you an email and says, "Oh, you can leave a couple of minutes early for your holiday weekend." And you forget the fact that we wouldn't have holiday weekends if it wasn't for working people fighting for it, right? We wouldn't have amendments to our constitutions about individual rights for people if it wasn't for working people. It was only mass mobilizations of workers that got us the what really needs to be reformed, right? But the apparatus of labor law that we're operating under that gives some of us some protection, right? And we won't have ideas to fortify those, right? To fortify that apparatus if we don't know what we did before. Even when we lost, right? Even though we don't have universal basic income and we don't have full employment, right? We've had those fights. We've been fighting and pushing for it. And so, no, we don't have to recreate the wheel, but we can, say, oh, you know what? Folks worked for this before, we can continue this fight. And it isn't so much that, like, I'm very hopeful, right? Because it isn't necessarily that we're still fighting for the exact same thing. It's that we're dealing with an opponent that adapts and shifts and changes, right? And so every time we win, they come back and say, okay, how can we cut them off? How can we continue to hold on to our unfair share, right? And so if we know our history, we know, oh, wait, you know what? They tried that tactic before. We're not going to let them divide us. We understand that we need a multiracial global movement of working people, right? And so we can continue to shift and all of our new strategies and, some of the same tactics that we've used before. We know that there's a path to a future that we can envision, right? And so we hold on to our dreams because we know that we've gotten more and more free. And it's not linear, right? It's push and shove. But if we know the fight, then we don't give up and we can hold on to hope. And I think that's one of the most important reasons why we need to know our history, right? And even the mistakes we made. So you can go back and look and say, oh, you know what? We caused harm by supporting the Chinese Exclusion Act. Why are we still having fights about immigrant workers' rights, right? Why are we allowing people to be kidnapped on their way to work, on their way to school, and then disappeared, forced into labor, right? Why are incarcerated workers putting out fires in California and handling recycling in Georgia and doing all kinds of work, right? So we haven't got rid of child labor, we haven't got rid of enslaved labor, right? So there's work that we can continue to do. But if we know our history, then we can point toward a path and we can see why we can come together and make a difference, right? So I think that those things go together. We need to tell our own stories and we need to know our history. And that is the importance of both knowing the past from the perspective of working people, right? And having access to a free media so that we're not being fed information, but we're having a critical conversation and debate about these issues.
And Naomi, I was hoping that you would read from the just the last response you have in the piece. Let's see, it's on page 56 to 57. And I know it's so frustrating when you sort of get Q&A interviewed and you don't really get control over editing your answer. Kim's obviously had more editorial power over her words, so please feel free to editorialize as you go. You know, if there's a piece you would add or add nuance to. But this just is my favorite part of the interview, and so I was hoping you would read it for us.
Okay, just that last response.
Uh, yeah,
When
about
we try to pretend.
yeah, just about this idea of like this concept of solidarity that's like very like kumbaya and just like everyone. My question to you and to Sarah was about sort of like everyone just like pretend, we're all the same, we're all the same. Um, and how like solidarity can sometimes be spoken about in that very kind of like kumbaya way, and how do we need to shift the conversation around that?
Great. Yeah. When we try to pretend that our differences don't matter, we struggle to mobilize in large numbers and to have any sort of cohesiveness to a movement. Because we don't know our history and we don't understand how mobilizing has worked for us, we don't consider it as an option, and we're playing it safe. So instead of playing it safe, why not center the needs of the most vulnerable among us and see if that's a path to true democracy and true freedom? Right now, too few of us can make what I would call independent choices based on our own wants because we're constrained by a system where people work full-time jobs and aren't able to afford housing and food and medical expenses, let alone entertainment and relaxation. Too many people work too long and too hard for too little. We're not free. And those of us with more privilege, we're trying to hold on to the little bit we have, as opposed to recognizing that we have more in common with the people who are struggling. When we can come together in solidarity and recognize that some people need more than we need, I think that opens the door to creative ways to leverage our power. If we really mean that we want to live in a democracy and we want people to have agency over their lives, then we have to come together. The people for the people. It has to literally mean something. And so it's just, I think it's that, right? That too often people are like whole groups of people, right? Based on some part of their identity are pushed into this category of other and then deemed unworthy, right? Or just outside of humanity. And when we allow whole groups of people to be outside of humanity, then we never see a need to come together, right? And so if we let like if we let the capitalist class continue to falsely divide us, then that means we don't have to care. Oh, I'm not an immigrant. Oh, my family came here through a different path. Does that mean that everybody shouldn't have access to a decent job and healthcare and food and safety? Freedom from fear and freedom from want. Those things really matter. And until we understand that us having a little bit, right, taking some of our money from, maybe savings to put to our grocery bill, like that hurts a little bit, but that doesn't actually help people not go hungry somewhere else, right? So there are things that we can do, and I mean it's beyond mutual aid. It's beyond just kind of showing up and clicking something and saying yes, I support this. It really is how are we pushing a policy? How are we holding politicians accountable? How are we demanding real, true, practical democracy, not just in the workplace, but everywhere, right? So how do we do that beyond voting, beyond this, beyond that, but making sure everybody has access to things that we say we believe in, right?
I had a couple more questions for you guys, but we are getting some really interesting Q&A questions, and I want to be able to give both of you. I'm getting the sense that probably both of you are going to have something to say about each one of these questions. So I think I'm actually going to move over to Q&A, um, just to kind of like honor the meatiness of some of these really thoughtful questions. Um, I'll save we have a question about books you guys would recommend, and I'll save that for a little bit later so that you have a little time to percolate on books that you would recommend. Um, uh, we have someone asking, can you speak to your experience balancing the speed with which you're organizing and trying not to leave anyone behind? People that are disabled, have language barriers, are marginalized in different ways.
Go ahead, Kim.
I was just thinking, so I would not call myself a labor organizer anymore. I got to do that for a little bit. Now I just get to watch. But some of the campaigns I've reported on that I think are tackling this kind of attention the way that you're talking about, the way that's really useful. Um, like the Starbucks campaign, for example, Starbucks Workers United. That is an effort that is predominantly led by some of the most marginalized workers. Like it's very queer led, very trans led, very black and brown led. Not entirely, but a lot of younger workers, folks that are honestly have been traditionally pushed to the margins or left out of the conversation altogether in the sphere of traditional labor organizing. And yeah, they're still locked in this battle against this corporate behemoth. Behemoth? I think it's behemoth. I don't know. You know, having you read a word a lot, you don't talk to people, or as nerdy as you. It's corporate mammoth. And but they have really done incredible work in not only starting this fight, they've gotten tons of attention from the public, a lot of public support, while refusing to give up or pull back any of their very vocal support of, of Palestine, for example, of their trans co-workers and the specific issues that they have to deal with within the company and structurally. They're very, very gay in a way that I think is very fun and very important for people watching the labor movement, especially younger people, more marginalized people who, for a very long time, and with good reason, maybe have felt like, okay, like I'm a worker, I am being exploited, I should be able to do something. But what I know about the labor movement, what I've seen in the media, in most commercial books, no one looks like me. This doesn't seem like a movement that would have a space for me, would care about what I have to deal with. I think that campaign has done a lot of really important work. There's another campaign I want to shout out, and kind of circling back to what Naomi said about the South, all roads lead to the South, especially with labor. The Union of Southern Service Workers are yeah, they're the
They
best.
are awesome.
Oh, the best. And that is another incredibly impactful worker-led, predominantly low-income Black women and brown women-led organization. They're not a traditional union because, as they very accurately identified, the traditional union structure wasn't really built with them in mind. So they are building their own outside of those structures and having a hell of an impact on employers in the South across that's kind of across the board. Like I think campaigns like that are very clear about who they are, who they represent, who is against them, who has not made space for them, like finding ways to take what they need from the traditional labor movement, from labor history, and then build something that actually suits them and their needs and the layers of oppression they're dealing with. That is the way that you actually make an impact now and ensure that, like you said, no one's left behind. There's no one size fits all solution.
Yeah, and you have to do both and, right? So, you have a campaign, you have a schedule, you're trying to meet your goals, but you still have to remember the humans behind the campaign, right? And so you have to make sure that everybody feels like they have a voice and they're able to express their wants and their needs. So it's a constant opportunity for communication and for learning and growing and from learning from each other, right? But you don't want to be extractive. You don't want to just like extract like the most vulnerable worker's story and say, I'm going to use this little piece because it fits in the campaign. But you actually have to hear what they're saying, what their expectations are, give them space to kind of learn and grow as you are building toward the campaign. And the more people feel included and feel like they're being heard and they're not being marginalized by the campaign structure, then that creates a little bit of space, right? And so some people need a little bit of extra work, and that's where you can go outside of your organizing team, right? And you can point them to the USSW. Like their social media is great. You can learn, like people can learn so much just from the testimonies and the little short history lessons, like really quick. You can like really, you know, really dive into some things and then have listening sessions. So one of the things that we did, like my union, right? We have a lot of different job categories and some people who are are really privileged and some who are not, right? And huge salary differences. But and time constraints, right? Some people can't show up at a certain time. But if you have like things like open listening hour so folks can come in and ask their questions, can get information, then that brings people in, right? And you can also make sure, like, are we addressing the needs of the people who are at the center of this, the people who are the most vulnerable? And if we can say yes, their needs are being met, then we know that all of our needs are being met. So it's really a both and kind of like being very careful and intentional in creating a space that feels inclusive.
There's a question asking you guys to talk about cooperatives versus labor unions. Does anyone feel inspired to take that question?
Whatever works. There's some cooperatives I think are really cool, doing really great work. Red Emma's in Baltimore, shout out. Yeah, I don't know enough about cooperatives like in this context to have a really useful answer. Whatever works for your individual workplace and
Yeah.
whatever takes care of the most people.
Right, right. Yeah. So, cooperatives are really about worker ownership. And so you're not sharing the profits are yours. Right? You're not sharing it with management, the profits are yours. And so then you can distribute them correctly. Not every, there are only certain types of industries and opportunities for cooperatives to really grow and expand. So that it's not something that you can really compare, but in terms of economic justice and in terms of creating a more just economy, cooperatives are essential, in my opinion, because they do create another ownership model that provides space for just the idea that workers have an explicit right to be involved in political economy of their community, of their city, of their state, of the nation, of the world, right? And so it's a matter of this is an avenue that folks can take. And the same thing, I'll just jump in and say the same thing for worker centers, right? So a worker center is not a labor union. It's more like USSW in the sense that folks can come together over shared interest, and there might be underserved by unions, but they can answer a lot of questions. They can move more flexibly, right? Because they're outside of some of the laws that constrain union, so they can do a lot more, right? We saw that with restaurant workers, restaurant opportunities, ROC. Somebody give me that what that stands for. I can't right now. Sorry. But and then like the immigrant rights worker centers are really flexible and it can do a lot of work.
There's a question about how realistic do you guys think a general strike is in the US, considering that there is no social safety net? Um,
I've
I
written so
personally
much
am very
about
curious to hear the answer.
this. I feel like I've written like 7 articles about this in the past year. People love talking about general strike. People hate doing all the work of organizing their workplace. Not to be flippant, be a little flippant, but
But it's true.
look, man, I'm saying I think there is an impulse. It's more fun and romantic and kind of energizing to think about like we all just gotta do it. Like just do it, go out, take over and like cool, okay. But what about people that have like kids or who have medical issues or have bills like or who aren't in a union workplace where you're able to take protected like it's complicated. And yeah, we don't have the social safety net. We also don't have the kind of labor laws that protect the majority of people in this country that some European nations that are always on strike have. Also, so many fewer of their police have the kind of military weaponry we have. Like, there's a reason that the French get to fight their cops all the time, and we have worse odds. Um, I'll just say that I think it is good and and hopeful that so many people, especially younger people, are thinking in these big ways, like what kind of big collective actions can we take? What sort of nuclear options do we have to address this horrific reality that we're sort of trapped in with, together? But un sorry, the mail. Okay. But it takes a lot more work than an Instagram post might lead you to believe. And I do want to emphasize that this is something that people are thinking about even within the realm of organized labor. Like the Mayday Strong Coalition, I think is really interesting. They are building on this call that Big Sean Fain, the leader of the UAW, International President UAW, had made a couple years ago now, calling on unions in this country to align their contracts to expire on May Day 2028. What does that mean? It means that this is kind of a clever legal way in which a lot of workers, unionized workers, would be available to strike all of a sudden. Because there's a lot of laws around this stuff. And like, yeah, like unjust laws aren't worth following, but like sometimes try telling that to a union lawyer, you know? It's complicated. But there are movements towards organizing within and outside of the traditional labor space, organized labor space, towards building these bigger mass resistance sort of models, while also adding in the sort of mutual aid and behind the scenes organizing that you actually need to sustain something like this. Everyone's not going to walk off the job tomorrow. If a lot of people walk off the job in a coordinated, calculated way for a week or two, then we're talking. But I am wary of this idea that like the general strike, you can just declare general strike and everything stops. That's not, it takes a lot more boring work than I think folks who are newer to the concept really understand. And I hate to be a bummer, but it's maybe read a couple books before you start talking about general strikes.
Yeah, I think that, right, it's been too often that the workers in the most desperate situations are taking the biggest risks. And for this to play off well, it is going to take, these big international unions with these strike funds, right, organizing in such a way that it forces the shutdown. We can go back to 2006, right, and look at the May Day, Day Without Immigrants, and see how successful that was because withholding their labor led to something. It didn't just happen, right? There was a lot of coordination, a lot of community support. But if we don't, it's already past the time where we should have been building those coalitions. And they're most, mm, I think it's fair to say, I was gonna hedge a little bit, but I think it's fair to say most unions haven't done the coalition work with their communities to support a general strike. And that's the problem, right? They're too beholden to the Democratic Party. They want to fall in line. They want to be pragmatic and safe again, right? And because they're in a place of privilege, they've been allowed to be safe. And it's the workers who can't take that chance to be safe that are suffering the most. And it's going to be on their backs again if we call unprepared for general strike because we have people who are dependent on their jobs for their medications, who are dependent on childcare, all of these things to survive. And if it's gone, then they don't have a pathway. There's nothing to protect them, right? But we have these international unions that have strike funds that have contingency plans, right? But they have to be willing to risk it. And it's safe to say that yes, we're at the position where it's desperate times. It's time to spend everything and be willing to lose the institution to save human lives. And but they're not there, right? They're like, I want to get reelected. I want my position, right? And it's like, again, that's not where we are right now. But because you don't feel it, you don't experience it the same way, then you're hedging your bets.
We only have a few minutes left. I'm trying to find a question that is maybe um, gonna be a good one to answer on. Yeah, this is something interesting that I don't feel like we've exactly covered yet. And this is interestingly enough, so it's a broad question, so you don't feel like you have to answer it too specifically. And this is from someone in Canada, which is how do you see the sort of the future for how unions could work with the Democratic Party, um, and uh, and sort of, I mean, I'm not gonna hold you guys to answering is another major political party in the U.S. possible, but that is also part of that question.
We need a Labor Party. I'm gonna say it. We need a Labor Party, right? The Democratic Party, right, is beholden to the capitalist class, right? They need their money to continue to hold their power. They need the capitalist money to hold on to power. And given the opportunity, they have continued to let down working people over and over, right? With the housing crisis in 2008 and the bailing out the banks and forcing people who had their homes stolen from them to repay the tax credit, right? Like there's so many opportunity. Like we don't have healthcare. Healthcare is tied to our jobs, right? The Democrats could have done something about that. And we have to use our power as best we can to force the Democratic Party to not follow our interests, but act in our best interests, the best interests of the majority of the folks, right? Or we need our own party. And at this point, we need our own party, right? We need a Labor Party. That's it. The Democrats aren't going to save us. Maybe we can save the Democrats, but
Mm.
the Democrats can't save us.
Mm. They sure seem to want us to save them, but I don't think they
Yeah,
deserve it.
they don't deserve it. They do not.
You know, I feel like there's a couple like newer candidates or whatever here and there that kind of get it, but that a couple drops in the ocean, you know. For every Ilhan Omar, we have like 70 dudes that would none of us could pick out of a lineup. We're all ruining our lives just casually. It, if we're gonna be stuck in this current system, a Labor Party's better than what we got. You know, and until we can all retire to the anarchist collective, I'd be down for a Labor Party, you know? Like it's it's interesting seeing other countries who have labor parties or like sort of labor parties and see what they've done with them, right? I mean, look at the UK. They got it in the name, but clearly that party is not interested in workers anymore. But it seems like other parties are kind of coming to eat their lunch a little bit. And I think that's a good thing. It's wild that for most of the existence of this nonsense country that we're in, there's only been like the two. Like you're really only allowed to have two shots, and they're both terrible. And, like, how have we let this go on for so long? Like there are more of us than there are of them.
No, we
There's,
have to use our people power against their money power.
you know, there's I don't know the right way to do it, but it's no whatever we got going on right now. Like right now, we have a really significant congressional race here in Philly, and one guy, like an establishment guy, has tons of labor unions behind him, and another guy who has much better politics, he's got some union support, but he doesn't have like the heavy hitters. And what does that say? When even, yeah, we're one city in one state, it's one race, but when like one guy who clearly cares more about workers, especially marginalized workers, who's down to call a genocide a genocide, who's got all this support from people who are not necessarily interested in the political process because we've been shut out for so long, why aren't all the big unions looking at him and saying, hey, this might be where we need to be? No, the establishment candidate, like he probably has better connections. Like it's a better, safer bet. And this is not a moment in time when like taking the safe bet is gonna keep anybody safe. Like this just there's a lack of imagination and a lack of just like political will to take a
Yeah.
fucking chance and veer
Right.
away from, you know, our friends in blue. Like something's gotta give.
Well, we have just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to give you guys your softball question, which is, are there books about labor solidarity that you would personally recommend?
Like fight like hell.
That Thank you.
That's a good one. I think that's a really good one. I think also like learning from our past and the possibilities. Kelly has a book called
Black folk.
Black Folk. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the sub. Maybe is it the making of the Black working class?
I literally just looked it up so I can mention it. The roots of the black working class.
The roots of the Black working class. And the reason why that one is important, right, is because not only is it rooted in oral histories and the story of her family life, right, but it's taking domestic workers and showing how domestic workers were central to Black liberation, to moving forward Labor Party, right, to the labor movement, right, through the ideas that they had to create when they didn't have access to even voting rights, right? They were able to move to get laws passed, to get education for their children, do all of these things. And then the postal workers, right? It's a be like as the federal workforce is being decimated right now, looking at the ways that postal workers through their unions helped like save democracy in the late 20th century, right? That story comes out in the later part of that book. And I think that if we're going to understand who even gets to be called a worker, we have to look at some of the ways that Black workers have been pushed out of the story, and those opportunities for liberation have been shut out. And it creates a new conversation. We ask better questions about how we move forward. So I definitely say Blair L.M. Kelly's The Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. I love to teach with it. It's really great.
Yeah, there's so many, especially le- man, I did so
Yeah, I
much
want to turn around.
research for the book. Yeah, yeah, right. Like, let's see, we got. I'm like, well, I got a couple over here too. Like, I would say a lot of it depends on where your interest is too, right? Like whether you want to read about like there's a great book called Disposable Domestics that gets into domestic labor from a more global perspective, or Juan Akers Chacon's Radicals in the Barrio, which is kind of a broader thing about like more radical Chicano movement in the US, but has so much good stuff about labor and solidarity. Or Revolting Prostitutes, this book from some UK writers about sex worker organizing in the UK. Or talk about Southern Black women organizing, Tara Hunter's To Joy My Freedom from the 90s. That's like a classic. My boy Hamilton Nolan put out a book recently called
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, about it's a little bit more recent, but it also focuses it's kind of across the country, but it focuses a lot on organizing in the South, in places where organizing, labor organizing is extra tough. Like Mississippi and North Carolina, I went to Florida. Like there really is so much out there. Daisy Pitkin's On the Line, which is really like this really lyrical book about her organizing alongside and with laundry workers. Like there's really so much out there. Um,
Yeah. I'll throw
it's
out
just
Paul
great.
Ortiz. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna say Paul Ortiz has a book called The Black and Latinx History of the United States, or maybe the Black and Latinx History of America. But it's a history book told from the perspective of Black and Brown folks, and it's full of labor history. He's a labor historian, right? He's doing great work in Florida now. He's at Cornell. But that's a great
Yeah.
overall arching story of the United States that really reflects working class issues.
Yeah, this is the thing that I found too when I was re doing research for my books. It was like early in pandemic, so I wasn't going nowhere. I wasn't going to archives or anything. I was just kind of going, I was just pestering my librarians and going through my bookshelf. And there's so labor history is everywhere. Um, I do love the kind of this type of worker, this type of history, like person, like their history in this place. One of my favorite labor books that doesn't get put on the labor book list that often is Sex Workers Unite, A History of the Movement from Stonewall to Slutwalk, Melinda Chatavert.
Yeah.
She wrote that. She also wrote a really sick book called Sisters in the Brotherhood about Pullman maids organizing within the context of the Brotherhood of sleeping car workers and like all the like multiple like it just shows that even unions that are like led by marginalized people like sometimes find ways to cut other people out. Like I love those messy contradictions, but that's what labor history is because it's just the people's history and we're a bunch of messy little freaks trying to do our best.
Right. And we should celebrate that messiness because that's where we get the answers, right?
Yeah,
If we don't have debates, we don't get the answers. We shouldn't shy away from it.
exactly. Like don't sanitize anything. Like the only reason we got this far is because we're some people were doing some dirty shit. We used to have
Indeed.
dynamite, you know? Like
Perfect note to to end our discussion. You guys, this was incredible. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your beautiful contributions. Thank you to everyone who came and who asked so many thoughtful questions in the chat. I'm sorry to those of you who we didn't get to answer your questions. We were not expecting this amount of engagement. It's so cool to see. But yeah, thank you to everyone. And thank you so much, Naomi and Kim and Orion.